I hope you enjoy this episode of A Hard Road, but to see more stories from our travels in Trump's America, including the 2020 presidential campaign, just click the like and subscribe button. Our journey through Trump's America had commenced at the Wall in Arizona and had taken us to places as diverse as South Carolina in the southeast and Minnesota on the Canadian border, Indiana and Iowa in the Midwest, and the Rust Belt states of West Virginia and Pennsylvania. But as different as those places may be, they were all critical battlegrounds in the war of ideas, values and raw politics that accompanied the rise of Donald Trump. Now, after a month and 5,600 kilometres on a sometimes hard road, during which time we interviewed more than 130 Americans in 8 states, we had arrived in Washington, D.C. Here we witnessed the midterm elections for ourselves and spoke to political campaign professionals, including John Podesta, former senior advisor to Bill Clinton, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. And we learnt what the results meant for the Republicans and Democrats, and most particularly for Donald Trump's re-election prospects in 2020. Had the internal division, the worst perhaps since the Civil War, turned Americans away from Trump's particular style of populism? Or did the booming economy and strong jobs growth vindicate his aggressive engagement with China? And was the rhetoric around race and the wall too much for a modern America? Or had the president just been articulating what so many of the citizens of this divided nation were already thinking?
Donald Trump, well, to be really honest, whenever they said that he was running for president, I thought it was a big prank on the whole United States of America. And then when he made it to the actual being the Republican candidate, I was like, oh, this is for real. And I was really worried about the minorities and about the lower income families and just the middle and lower class.
I think he does a good job. It's a hard position, so there's going to be a lot of pressure. There's going to be a lot of answers people don't want to hear.
He's probably a great businessman for his company, but for the country, I think if we want the country to be run as a business, that's great, but I think maybe it should be run more like a family.
And I think he could be a good president if he just stopped being rude to people.
Well, he is a masterful politician in that he understands the media like almost no one does. And he understands how to manipulate the crowd. He's done that. But in terms of a leader or a politician or a good person, someone to inspire Americans to do the right thing, he fails completely.
I don't like Trump, but the Democrats haven't changed, and they're saying, well, your food doesn't taste good, just keep chewing it.
I think it's half and half. You've got your crazy Trump supporters, and then you've got your crazy left wings. So I try to stay in the middle. Yeah. I'm like Switzerland.
I don't like his tweeting, but I like the fact that I respect what he's doing.
First of all, as Trump is a human being, I think his actions and his words speak for themselves. He's not a good man, and I think he's an embarrassment, and I think we should hold our standards higher in this country.
Well, I think he's unhinged. I think he is a malignant narcissist and has paranoid tendencies, but besides that, I think he's a man with no moral center.
I don't think very much of him. In fact, he's a real disappointment to me. I think he's divided our country. He's contributed to so many people losing their moral compass. When we have people saying, well, we can overlook this, that, and the other thing because, you know, he's rough on the edges. No, he is not representing Americans.
I think he's done a great job. I think he's nominated people and has put really good people around him. So I'm happy with the job he's done so far.
I think he's done a good job too. I think he's changed the face of how we do politics in this country. I think that's the one thing that's people are not going to be afraid to come out and say and do what they had on their mind, and they're not going to pander. to who's in the room. So I think that's good.
The problem is the Democratic Party for 30 to 50 years has said everything bad about the Republicans. They call them all kind of names, and the Republicans are like little sheep, and they stand back and take all this BS. Donald Trump is the first one that stood up there and gives it back to him. He's a counterpuncher.
You know, there's a few times I'll said, Donald, that wasn't a good thing. But basically, what he's done, he's pretty much done what he said he's going to do. You know, you do get your hands tied when you're in office a lot of times, but he's a go-getter, and he was serious about making America great. But I've always thought it's great anyway.
His attitudes and tweeting has shown us some ugly hate in this country that I didn't know was there, and so if there's good in that, it's good to know.
I think he's a phenomenal president for our country, and I will say, I think he'll go down as the best president in history.
Election day in the United States is always on a Tuesday, which is a working day for Americans. Every one of the 435 seats in the House of Representatives and about 1/3 of the 100 Senate seats were up for grabs. That evening, we were guests at the National Press Club where we watched the results coming in. By the end of the night, there was an outcome, but had either party had a conclusive win. The two parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, had fought themselves to a standstill. The Republicans had increased their majority in the Senate, but the Democrats took the House. By the following morning, the focus had already shifted to 2020 and what it meant for Donald Trump's re-election prospects.
I think there's a lot of great news and great things that happened for the Democrats last night. And I think what you look at is you want to look at the state houses, you want to look at the state legislatures, and certainly the control of Congress. And I think at the federal level, what you saw is a check on Donald Trump in a meaningful way. Democrats are going to control the House. They picked up north of 30 seats. Looks like more seats are going to come that way as well. When you look at the results, you get a lot of the states where Donald Trump did well and has traditionally done well are in rural states, less populated states and everything else. That's where you saw Democrats get beat. And if you look at Missouri, if you look at Indiana, when you start looking at those states, that's sort of what happened last night. In terms of the House election, and the reason why Democrats did so well is the demographic that's really turning against Donald Trump is suburban women, particularly suburban married women. Suburban married women are traditionally, for the past generation, have trended Republican, lean Republican, and everything else. And that was a difference maker that the Clinton campaign aggressively reached out to in 2016. Didn't turn out to be successful. But last night, the way the numbers are and how they're breaking, that's why the Democrats were able to pick up these 30 seats. And that's where you really see a discrepancy between what happened in the rural states, which Donald Trump's, people showed up in force, but more urban and suburban areas, the Democrats outperformed what they traditionally have.
He has promised big around tariffs and
You're
trade
absolutely right.
and so forth. If he doesn't deliver.
Right. Well, then he could be in trouble in 2020. My question is, the polarization is so great. If he does something good, is he going to be able to move independent voters? By and large don't support him. So who's he going to move? I mean, and let's face it, there's been some controversies throughout his tenure, and they may drop his job performance 3 or 4 points, but it's back up again. And I'm thinking, well, what's the cause for that? And it could be the relationship between the economy, it could be the rallies, it could be more lately the whole business of the caravan, which I think ultimately helps him, given the videos that we've seen, more than hurts him politically anyway. But he still has a job performance in the area that's often lethal.
When we speak to Latino people, to African Americans,
Right.
they feel personally targeted by him when he speaks like that. Does that?
It's not helpful. It's a hurdle. I'm very proud to state that in 2004 we received 44% of the Hispanic American vote on George W. Bush's re-election campaign. That's a high percentage and a high water mark that we've never received since. John McCain, when we had 7 coalitions that I ran, Americans of faith, Americans of different communities. The big intent of Ronald Reagan, the cheery, happy warrior, is a party, and Jack Kemp, again, that I referenced before, is one that I'm a part of. Politics is a game of addition, not subtraction. Politics is a place where you bring everyone in, as many as possible.
I think the challenge the Democratic Party has is we don't necessarily have a believable message to the white, working, blue-collar worker.
The average industrial worker who voted for Trump doesn't want to move to New York and take a 3-month training class in programming and do some coding work. That's not the life he wants. Yeah. But that's largely the life that democratic economic policies have offered to him or her, and that's not an acceptable answer. The current president comes along and says, I'm going to get you back what you lost. That's a much more appealing message.
There's no relationship between how a party does in a midterm election with their president and whether that president can get himself reelected. 1982, Reagan's first midterm, he lost 26 seats in the House. Let's go to Bill Clinton in 1994. The Democrats lost 54 seats in the House. Let's go to President Obama, his first midterm, 2010. His party, the Democrats, lost, and I'm glad you're seated next to me, 63 seats. And all three won re-election with well over 300 electoral votes. You only need 270. If you don't believe me, ask Hillary. Ask Secretary Clinton,
What we did know was that the midterm campaign had been a referendum on Donald Trump's presidency. We also now know that the American people, although I believe deeply unhappy with aspects of his presidency, had still been prepared to give him the benefit of the doubt. In the 12 months since the midterms, we've seen the impact of the Democrats' control of the House of Representatives, most obviously by the commencement of impeachment proceedings against Trump. But the challenge remains for the Democrats to find a leader who will unite a nation that I believe is still as divided as at any time since the Civil War.
I think Trump fires up the base for us. So I think that we don't necessarily need somebody who's going to be all about the base, but we need somebody who can show the country that we can come together again.
You have to build a sense of a future that is positive, and the journey that people need to go on with you to get to a better place.
I think in order to be impactful and successful against Trump, you got to draw a sharp contrast. And I think where we should be is identify somebody that's going to be aspirational.
Inevitably, Democrats and independents who are going to vote to determine who the nominee of our party is are desperate for someone who can restore dignity and truth and basic morality to the Oval Office. We haven't seen assaults on those things like this really ever in American history. Even Nixon was more upstanding in the way that he served as president than this guy, and he resigned in disgrace. So yes, we're certainly going to see people campaigning on the proposition that they will restore some of those moral code to the White House.
It's a real shame that we can't have an Obama, because that's what the moment cries out for. It cries out for somebody who says, we can rise above, think of the better angels of our nature again. And I don't even know if you need to have the lofty rhetoric, but just somebody, I think, who campaigns on a message of bringing the country together again, which seems cliched, but it's not. I mean, at this point, we've never been more divided than we are at this moment under Donald Trump. So what's the antithesis to Donald Trump? It's somebody who actually does bring people together.
So I think being able to be optimistic, being able to point to a future, and being able to credibly say that you're going to tackle this kind of central number one problem that I think has vexed and even vexed President Obama, which is we're going to create an economy that's fair, that's working for everybody, that's built on growth, but that's inclusive, is going to be someone who's likely to be successful.
I'm not sure you can put the genie back in the bottle. I know that may be a little naive, but I do think that at some point, what's going to there's going to be a certain appeal in dry competence for the next president.
Our view is what they will absolutely have to do is define the moment that people are living in ways that sound recognizable to them, and offer them an optimistic vision of the future that they see themselves in. And it's got to be credible. So if you tell everyone, we're just going to give you everything for free. We're going to give you your health care, it's going to be free. We're going to give you your education, it's going to be free. We're going to give you a job, it's going to be free. They're going to think, how are you going to do that? And it's probably not going to be me, and it isn't going to be free because nothing's free. We're going to have to pay for it somehow. So whatever vision the Democrats offer, it better resonate, it better seem relevant, and it better seem credible.
My district is almost 50-50 on everything. No party voters are the majority. So they've already told Democrats and Republicans they don't want none of the above. They want to be independents. They want to talk about the issues they care about without the umbrella of a party around it. I think we should learn a lesson from that. That when we rip open our chest and we got a big letter D or a big letter R, most of the voters are not interested in that kind of conversation. So you can actually tell them you're not either. You don't actually need to be whatever the parties are trying to make you be. And I think Trump was a perfect example of that, even inside the Republican Party. He was certainly an outlier if you looked at the history and all the stuff that the other candidates had. So why can't Democrats figure that out, has been my point.
I do think we're going to have a generational challenge or battle, so to speak, between some of those that are older that are going to want to run against some of the younger upstarts. And I think that's what's going to be interesting. I think the challenge the Democratic Party is going to be is you're probably going to see 25 candidates or so that are going to run, and that's going to be a lot of people in a crowded Democratic primary.
But I think for the most part, what people want are people who can win and people who are more in the mainstream. And if I had to guess what is the most, and when people begin to decide, do I want this person or that person in the primaries? There are going to be a lot of people running, and you'll get every flavor, both of ideology. There are going to be a lot of women that run. There are going to be African Americans that run. There are going to be a lot of different people who run. I think the thing that is going to be the most decisive is who can convince the voters that they can beat Trump.
I think Michael Avenatti, the Stormy Daniels attorney and paparazzi seeker that he is, he gave it away a few weeks ago. He said it needs to be a white guy. No discredit to anybody. Hillary trying to break that glass ceiling for females, Kamala or Corey, any of the contenders, qualified, of age, backgrounds, whatever you want to discuss, this country is still hesitant for rapid change. Barack Obama was half white. That mattered. He was a presentable with all its loaded implications, and that's Harry Reid's word. He came across a certain way. The country is not ready for radical change, whether it's Andrew Gillum or anywhere else who sort of conforms to the political status quo. And I think Joe Biden is that candidate from central casting.
John Delaney is a former Maryland congressman and was the first candidate to throw his hat in the ring for the Democratic Party's presidential nomination. I asked him what he would bring to the office of president.
Well, first of all, I would basically swear to the American people never to divide them. I think that should almost be part of the oath of office. I wouldn't talk about half the country as if they're entirely wrong about everything they believe, which is what we have too much of in politics these days. I'd actually, when I was sworn in my inauguration, I'd look out at the American people and say, I believe I represent every one of you, whether you voted for me or not. And to prove it, in my first 100 days in office, my agenda is going to be the following things, all of which have bipartisan support, right? So I think you have to not just say these things, you have to walk the talk. And I think there's a huge number of things in this country that we agree with each other on, but they never get leadership in our government. And I think the president ultimately sets the tone at the top. And if a president steps forward and says, I am actually going to work to find common ground and get things done, every great thing this country's ever done has been with bipartisan support. So we need a leader who actually believes that. 97% of the American people, for example, believe we should have universal background checks in our country, which we don't have now. 97% of the American people, but we don't have it. Why? Because our government is so divided, right? We don't have representative democracy anymore. Things like gerrymandering and too much money in politics have really distorted our government. And we just have to turn the page on all that. And we have to start doing things that the American people want us to do. And gun safety, you know, respectful of the Second Amendment, of course, it's key to our freedom, but common sense gun safety is part of that. And we should have universal health care in this country. We clearly spend enough money to ensure that everyone in this country has health care. And I think it's a basic human right. But it's also smart economics. That's the other problem with government. It doesn't really focus on the future. If you were actually thinking about the economy of the next 25 or 50 years, I think it's going to be an economy where people have 5, 7, 10 jobs. So this old model of tying your health care to your job, which we do here, is really an outdated model. In a good economy, every single worker is always thinking about doing something better, learning more skills, trying to get ahead. And if you have things like healthcare that tie people to their job, in other words, they're afraid to take another job that might be a better job and where they'll get more skills, but they don't want to lose their healthcare, that's a terrible economic model. We're leaving our kids kind of an unpayable fiscal debt at this point. But if you actually count what the cost of climate change is going to be and what kind of economic crisis we're going to have in our country and around the world because of climate change, and what kind of geopolitical instability will be driven by climate change, and how much that'll cost our military and all that stuff, if you add up all that stuff, it's another massive, massive debt that the future generation can't pay. And they're right to be angry about it. I'm angry that we haven't done anything about it. I mean, in some ways, we're almost headed towards another form of civil war. It won't be anything like the real Civil War, but it'll be a situation where we can't find common ground, where disinformation wars continue to divide our people, and where literally anything that gets done in government is met with kind of almost violent protest. And we can't have that as our future. We actually have to come together. We have to start finding common ground, and we have to take this fractured nation where American has been pitted against American and actually start bringing it together.
Throughout our time in the US, the one overwhelming impression we had was of a nation divided, despite its claim to be the United States of America. Disunity of this dimension possibly hasn't occurred here since the American Civil War in the 1860s. The worst carnage in that war was at Gettysburg, a small town in Pennsylvania. And this was the place where Abraham Lincoln delivered one of the most compelling speeches for unity in his nation's history. This is the Gettysburg Military Cemetery, where some of the 11,000 Confederate and Union soldiers who died in that battle are buried. It's also the place where in 1863, Abraham Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address, one of the most moving and eloquent speeches in history. It was just 272 words in length, perhaps because Lincoln, even in the era before radio, understood the power of brevity. And he was the first president to control a political message through an electronic medium, the telegraph, which he did to great effect by sending quotes and stories to newspapers across the states. Franklin Roosevelt mastered the radio and his opposition. Kennedy was the first president to understand the power of television, and after him came Obama and Facebook. And now it's Trump and the tweet. As we consider Donald Trump's next date with destiny in November 2020, it's fitting that here at Gettysburg, the last word should go to Abraham Lincoln, who made this observation. Nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power. I hope you enjoyed this episode of A Hard Road. To see more stories from our travels in Trump's America, including the 2020 presidential campaign, just click the like and subscribe button.